Hello, thanks for tuning in. This is Timothy Childs. I'm the CEO of Treasure 8 in San Francisco, California. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about a presentation I recently gave in Milan at the Seeds&Chips Summit, and to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about the challenge about food waste as a whole and its impact on the planet and people, and then an idea of how to put this together. So we haven't spoke publicly about what we're doing in about 5 years, and we wanted to present a little bit about information about not what we're doing, but about the problem itself, and a hint about some of the solutions, because we're still kind of in stealth mode, and we're going to reveal downline, but just to give people thinking about this big challenge and then the massive opportunity that's resulted of that. So we want to talk about feeding billions of people over time using food waste itself. The story is quite simple, and I'll get into that. But first, I really want to explain a little bit about the context about how actually damaging food waste is for the planet. It's kind of a unseen, lurking, major problem that we have in the world. And my argument is basically if we can work on solving for food waste and feeding people better, it's one of the most impactful ways for us to spend our time, energy, and resources to solve. So but luckily by now, and when we started this venture, about 6 years ago, people weren't realizing that food waste was really a problem. But the good news now is becoming a thing, right? We've been quietly behind the scenes putting pieces together, but now it's becoming cool, right? So food waste is becoming a thing that's got value. So the big issues, we start seeing all the same numbers floating around. The bottom line is about 40 to 50% of the food that's grown globally doesn't get it to someone's mouth. And the reasons why in each country is different, right? So in the United States, for example, if you look on this chart on the left, the vast majority of waste comes from home consumption and from leftovers from retail, that's restaurants and as well as retail groceries and so on and so forth. But if you look at the far right, just kind of a contrast, you see the sub-Saharan Africa, very little done in the loss in the consumption because it's so hard to get. But most of the loss is due to production, and part of that is due to lack of cold chain supply distribution networks, which we actually have solutions for, which is kind of cool. But we'll talk about that another time. So it's a little different in every country. But the main top level story here, it's annually, based upon the Rockefeller Foundation's research, almost $1 trillion of food loss economic resources lost every year, right? We see that just in America alone, it's just massive. It's a massive, massive target. It's a massive area of opportunity for us to come up with solutions to address. But it's so massive. Let's talk a little bit about the impact that really means, though. A lot of people realize that agriculture consumes a lot of water, right? But people don't realize that due to food waste, we lose about 24% of that, which is, it sounds pretty big, but when you really kind of map it out, that's 45 trillion gallons, according to the World Resource Institute. That's nuts, right? So, first of all, it's a big water waster. Most people don't realize that food is the number one fill in landfills. And then the dirty secret there is that when rotting food doesn't get the oxygen it needs, what does it do? It produces methane. And food waste alone is the third largest producer of methane behind China and the United States. And as we know, methane is, while it's shorter living than CO2, it's significantly more damaging to the environment and the global warming than CO2 is. So what happens, and this is the story we kind of behind the scenes in the unseen story about what happens with food waste isn't addressed. Well, what happens is, one of the major drivers, methane is one of the major drivers of global climate change. And with rising global climate change, what happens? Well, food prices go up. And a little bit talk about, just give you an example of this. This is Oxfam charting what would normally be the blue bars is the normal baseline where the prices would be in 2030, but the light green bars are the ones that's going to the prices of crops are going to be in 2030 due to global warming. And you start looking at the basics, wheats, maize, whatever, it's going to be rising prices, and that is not a good thing. There's one main reason why that's not a good thing. Is what does it do? It produces scarcity. And scarcity, a lack of food, drives conflict. It's a direct correlation. And a lot of people don't see it this way. I mean, a lot of people don't know about this, but this is what we're trying to do is expose this kind of cycle. So what happens is when there's not enough food, there's violence fighting for that food. And often that fighting, that violence creates displacement. People leave that area, they go in a new area, more violence occurs, there's not enough food. And it's this constant cycle. It's a downward spiral of not goodness. So just kind of bring it up on a better level about actually what happens when we do approach the food system and we improve it, right? So what happens is the economy of that particular country improves, the educational achievement, the earning potential goes up because better nutrition through their childhood development and also as their as population as a whole. The environment improves based upon some of the examples we gave. Public health care costs go down. Public health in general goes up, and that actually makes a impact on the GDP of a country. But also it affects water usage, and that's really becoming a major issue these days. And also, as we know, that now food waste kind of can drive scarcity and drives conflict, and it also really is a way to help make our foreign policy expressions a little bit easier. But without us addressing this, it's still going to probably have some areas of conflict. So a lot of people want to know kind of how I got involved with this, why I'm got this kind of global, big scale vision to do this. Well, it's kind of got a weird and interesting background. I kind of grew up in food systems in some ways. Is that I grew up with my mother, my father, designing the first decorations for shopping centers back in Dallas for North Park 1,000 years ago. There's me at 4 years old. My first job was sorting pallets of lollipops by color for making all these decorations out of candy and food. And I grew up doing that a big chunk of my early life. And then moved out to California, kind of got the internet bug and the virtuality thing back in the late 80s. And really parlayed that into becoming a kind of virtuality pioneer type person and working with the internet startups for quite some time. And then I kind of leveraged that over time to make a long story short into taking the Silicon Valley approach and recombining it in new and novel ways to solve problems faster, better, and cheaper. And to put that together, the last thing I did before I jumped in the food business was one of my companies was building machine vision systems for the orbiter program itself. But then taking this kind of Silicon Valley startup, munch things together approach, and I kind of turned that into kind of my secret weapon to take my mission. It was finding the vulnerabilities in the food systems, finding broken loops and putting them together and tightening those up, or actually creating loops that didn't exist, and trying to improve value all the time along the way. And I try to create these technologies and processes to make things more effective. Really often trying to use off-the-shelf technologies from other domains and putting them into these areas. So at Cho, I was solving for solving for chocolate. The chocolate Cho was a company I founded. Looked at the entire part of the supply chain down to the point where people consume the chocolate. Created a flavor wheel based upon people's flavor and choices, not by country origin. I was done before, and I also looked at every part of the supply chain, and I tried to revolutionize each part of that. And part of revolutionizing each part of this cacao supply chain, I try to use cheap off-the-shelf technologies and processes that allowed kind of a democratization of processing, like getting more people engaged in the supply chain, be able to touch it and improve it along the way, and use this premiumization model to drive change. With programs are now touching hundreds and hundreds of thousands of farmers worldwide, which is beautiful thing. But I went from solving for C now and started Treasure 8 to go solve a much larger thing, solving for N, global nutrition. A tagline for Treasure 8 is deploying nutrition for humanity. And what we do with this is we're taking this kind of systematic approach and looking at it kind of holistically and looking at food waste as a primary driver to create foods and ingredients that would normally be wasted. So a quick overview about the food waste production pipeline where it kind of happens. So if you look at the chart, it's from farming, goes to transportation to distribution, processing, packaging, back to further distribution, and then retail and consumer. Retail is restaurants and Whole Foods and actually in your kitchens as well. But at Treasure 8, we focus on two primary areas. That's the green and the blue ones. It's the infield waste, which is the imperfects left over, the seconds, the gluts, stuff that can't normally be making to market, and processing that right in the fields as well. And then also post-production food waste that's coming from juicing, beer, wine, almonds, tomatoes, a host of things we have access to. The reason we're focusing on these two areas is specifically because we can get access to consistent, reliable sources of waste stream materials that we can produce volumes at scales. It's very, very important that we take this approach. So kind of going back on the top level of the food waste as a whole, this is the main part of the story. Out of the 1.3 billion metric tons of food waste that's wasted every year, there's also, on an annualized basis, there's 800 million people that are food insecure globally. And actually, shockingly, that's 1 in 5 Americans are food insecure. And what we didn't talk about in this presentation when we represent the food insecure, we're actually also meaning the first 1,000 days. And the first 1,000 days is the nutrition set for a mother and baby, the 9 months of pregnancy and the 2 years thereafter, but we're not publicly talking about that yet, but we are in this presentation. So the opportunity for us is massive, right? So if we can just take a small percentage of the food waste in general, we can feed a whole bunch of people. And so that's the main thing that we're doing is we're solving for N. We're developing this waste to nutrition pipeline. And this pipeline has to be looked at these solutions have to be looked at in a systematic basis. It has to be looked at tied together. So what we do at Treasure 8 is we look at each one of these sections and we've been quietly putting together different parts of the supply chain, this pipeline, and solving for some of it, got advancements and patents in some areas. We're just starting to get going. But our pipeline depends on capturing the food waste at source and converting it using novel equipment, a number of different drying technologies, some of that we carry patents or licenses for, and also to be able to use the food waste itself to actually take the low-cost ingredients to bring down the production prices by having the op costs for the machines themselves lower by using energy from the food waste itself. But we take that food waste itself, use our in-house product development teams, and actually develop products and processes, as process development, that points towards large-scale manufacturing for our products and for products for others, like large-scale manufacturers, global consumer packaged goods, and the like. And that's products and ingredients. But for us, and also the consumption on the far end is very important. We predict that food waste is going to be cool, and we want to be able to help position that. And we're starting to see signals of that as well right now, that people are thinking that food waste is going to be a big thing. But the key thing about this whole thing is it has to work with current pricing. It has to work in current pricing distribution systems. If it doesn't work in current distribution systems, it's not going to fly on its own. And our regenerative models are designed to be self-perpetuating through making money every step along the way of the supply chain. So how are we able to do that? We're able to do that by having low input costs, by having close to free or low cost inbound materials, and using the food waste itself to create energy to lower our operation costs of making the conversion, and then using large-scale manufacturing processes to keep the large-scale manufacturing economies of scales in place to be able to be competitive in distribution. Okay, so that's kind of the rough snapshot of the pipeline that we're developing. But now let's pull up to 10,000 feet or 30,000 feet and kind of look at what kind of impact this has, right? So we look at, by addressing these two main areas, if we can address the food waste and also feeding people better, we've got a 6-fold impact that happens due to this, right? So first of all, it reduces global climate change, and it obviously has impact on the carbon footprint. It increases public health and prosperity, and by addressing these issues, by feeding people better, we reduce population growth. Bill and Melinda Gates talks about that. You feed mothers better, they have fewer children. It's that direct. It's a great way to reduce conflict by having more foods for folks, and through an indirect process and direct process in some ways, improve the GDP of a country, and obviously make a stab at producing a lot of the water loss as well. And in this talk, I kind of gave a couple quick examples of some of our solutions, right? And those, if you look at this entire pipeline, that pipeline produces products. We're not a product company, we're a solutions company that creates products. So there's a couple of quick snapshots. One of the first thing out of the pike is our Realize cookie thins, and they're designed initially for hospital maternity wards. They're good enough to go into them, but also designed with food waste in mind, specifically beet powders from juice pressing. So the first ingredient in our cookies are vegetables. You can't even tell. Kids love them. And it's gone through large-scale manufacturing, and it's a great product. Another key product is one of our workhorses. It's just coming out now. It's called Sana, and we have this novel processing technology that we've licensed exclusively from the USDA. We didn't talk about this in the presentation, but we are now. And it's a way to actually capture infield waste and take the imperfects, the uglies, and slice them at the source eventually with low energy and with that frying oil and making these really great tasting chips with it. The ingredients are beets or sweet potato or apple. And it's just amazing. And all the micronutrients are stored, all the flavors are there. It's amazing. So that's just kind of a couple quick snapshots of some of the solutions that come out of the output of our waste to nutrition pipeline. So I ended the talk talking about the partners we're looking for. We're looking for partners that actually realize that to address these big moonshot issues that we have to look at it systematically and we have to look at it at large scale. Otherwise, it's not going to work. We're looking for folks that actually have a desire for scale and can appreciate and recognize a big vision and want to put some resources behind that and make that happen. So folks that are resource ready, we're ready to talk to as well. So if you want any further information, there's some contact information there. And I thank you for your time. And hopefully we can work together in solving some of these big issues by taking food waste and making safe and novel ingredients in food products for people and humans, and also making energy out of that to change the world and make impact. Thank you.